Imagine a world where laughter isn't a joy, but a contagious illness, a relentless fit that steals your breath, consumes your mind, and renders you utterly helpless. In 1962, in a small, unsuspecting village in Tanganyika, now modern-day Tanzania, this terrifying fantasy became a nightmarish reality. What started as a simple giggle in a girls' boarding school rapidly spiraled into an epidemic of uncontrollable, agonizing laughter, infecting thousands, shutting down communities, and leaving a trail of questions that still haunt us decades later. Was it mass hysteria, a bizarre psychological weapon, or something far more sinister that unleashed this peculiar plague upon an isolated corner of Africa? To truly grasp the unsettling nature of this event, we must rewind to January 30th, 1962. The stage was set at the Kashasha boarding school, an institution for girls located in a tranquil, rural district. Life there was undoubtedly regimented, strict, and perhaps for some students, a little stifling. One seemingly ordinary morning, three teenage girls were engaged in a casual conversation, a shared moment that dissolved into a fit of giggles. An innocuous scene, you might think. But this wasn't just ordinary laughter. This was different. This was unnerving. Their giggles quickly escalated into prolonged, convulsive bursts that seemed impossible to control. Soon, the eerie, booming peals of laughter began to spread, not like a pleasant shared joke, but like a virus. It coursed through the dormitories, snaked its way into classrooms, and infiltrated the dining hall. Within hours, 95 of the 159 students were locked in an inescapable loop of mirth, their faces contorted, their bodies shaking, their voices hoarse, unable to stop. This wasn't the laughter of amusement, it was the laughter of pure, unadulterated distress. Their teachers, confused and increasingly alarmed, struggled to understand what was happening. This wasn't defiance or mischief. It was an involuntary affliction. The girls described feeling overwhelmed by a powerful, unexplainable urge to laugh, often accompanied by crying, fainting spells, and even rashes. They couldn't concentrate, couldn't learn, and certainly couldn't stop. School, for all intents and purposes, ceased to function. The initial reaction was confusion, then concern, quickly followed by a chilling realization. This wasn't going away. It was growing, mutating, and demanding attention, forcing the closure of the school on March 18th, sending the afflicted students back to their respective villages, and inadvertently ensuring the epidemic would not be contained. The closure of the Kashasha school, intended to halt the spread, instead became the unfortunate vector. As the affected students returned to their homes, they carried with them not only their own persistent paroxysms of laughter, but also the unseen contagion that seemed to cling to their very presence. The invisible malady began to seep into the wider community. Within weeks, the neighboring village of Nshamba, where many of the students resided, reported its first cases. Then it was Bukoba, and soon, like ripples in a pond, the inexplicable laughter was echoing across at least 14 villages. The symptoms were consistent: bouts of uncontrollable laughter, often lasting from a few hours to an astonishing 16 days, punctuated by periods of intense crying, anxiety, restlessness, and sudden, inexplicable panic attacks. This wasn't fun, it was torture. People described feeling utterly exhausted, their muscles aching, their throats raw, their minds reeling from the relentless siege of their own bodies. The epidemic showed no mercy, affecting all ages, though children and adolescents seemed particularly susceptible. Adults, too, fell victim, their lives grinding to a halt. Farmers couldn't work their fields, vendors couldn't tend to their stalls, and parents struggled to care for their families while grappling with their own bizarre affliction. The fabric of daily life began to unravel. Local authorities and medical professionals, operating with limited resources and an even more limited understanding of the phenomenon, were completely bewildered. There were no obvious pathogens, no visible injuries, no logical explanation for this collective breakdown. Doctors, baffled, could only offer symptomatic relief, but no cure. They theorized it might be a viral infection, a strange allergic reaction, or even some form of food poisoning. Yet, comprehensive testing revealed nothing. The lack of a physical cause, a tangible enemy, only deepened the fear and confusion. Rumors began to circulate. Was it witchcraft? A curse? A punishment from angry spirits? In a time before instant global communication, these isolated communities were left to grapple with an invisible force that defied rationality. The epidemic intensified, peaking in the spring and early summer months. The situation became increasingly desperate as more and more people succumbed, the cacophony of convulsive laughter becoming an unsettling soundtrack to the daily struggle for normalcy. Schools were forced to close, entire villages were affected, and the sheer number of incapacitated individuals strained the already fragile social structures. Normal life became impossible in many areas, replaced by a pervasive sense of dread and helplessness. The scale was unprecedented for such a bizarre, non-lethal ailment. What was this unseen enemy, and why did it choose Tanganyika? The climax of this strange saga occurred amidst widespread panic and societal breakdown. At its peak, estimates suggest that over 1,000 individuals were afflicted across various communities. The laughter wasn't a fleeting moment of amusement, but a debilitating condition, rendering its victims incapable of daily tasks and often forcing them into isolation or medical supervision. Imagine being trapped in your own body, your diaphragm convulsing uncontrollably, tears streaming down your face, not from sorrow, but from the physical strain of laughter that offers no relief, no joy. Some individuals experience such prolonged bouts that they would collapse from exhaustion, only to awake and find themselves laughing again, sometimes for hours or even days on end. The physical toll was immense. Headaches, dizziness, breathing difficulties, fainting spells, and even persistent skin rashes were commonly reported. The mental anguish, however, was arguably worse. The inability to control one's own body, the sense of being possessed by an alien force, must have been terrifying. The afflicted often described profound anxiety and disorientation accompanying their fits. The social impact grew catastrophic. Relationships fractured, commerce dwindled, and the very structure of communities began to fray under the relentless pressure of this baffling plague. Parents, if not afflicted themselves, watched helplessly as their children spiraled into these disturbing episodes. The government and international health organizations remained largely stumped. They conducted investigations, collected samples, and interviewed affected individuals, but found no consistent pathology, no common toxin, no identifiable psychological trigger beyond the initial imitation. It defied all conventional medical and scientific understanding. This wasn't just mass hysteria. It was something far more profound, something that crossed the lines of individual psychology and seeped into the collective unconscious. The sheer volume of cases, often in separate, non-communicating clusters, argued against simple psychological suggestion. Yet, what else could it be? The epidemic reached its pinnacle of severity, leaving a population exhausted, terrified, and utterly without answers. It was a period of sustained horror, marked by the constant unsettling sound of involuntary mirth echoing through the quiet African landscape, a sound that carried no joy, only the chilling resonance of an unknown internal torment. Then, as mysteriously as it began, the laughter epidemic slowly, gradually began to recede. By late 1962 and into 1963, the reports of new cases dwindled. The duration of the laughter fits became shorter and the intensity lessened. Eventually, sometime in the middle of 1963, almost 18 months after those initial giggles at Kashasha, the epidemic faded out completely, leaving behind a bewildered populace and a medical community still scratching their heads. No definitive medical conclusion was ever reached. The prevailing theory, eventually adopted by most researchers, was that the Tanganyika laughter epidemic was a classic case of mass psychogenic illness, MPI, also known as mass hysteria. This phenomenon occurs when a group of people experiences similar physical symptoms, but without a clear physical cause. In the context of 1962, Tanganyika, a newly independent nation transitioning from colonial rule, significant social and cultural stresses were prevalent. The strict environment of the boarding school, coupled with the anxieties of a changing society, might have created a fertile ground for such a psychological outbreak. However, this explanation, while widely accepted, still doesn't fully capture the sheer scale, the physical severity, and the prolonged nature of the events. How could psychological stress manifest in such a precise, geographically contagious, and physically debilitating manner across thousands of people? The questions linger. Was it truly just the mind playing tricks, or did some subtle, undetected environmental factor or a unique combination of social pressures create a temporary vulnerability in the human psyche, allowing this bizarre phenomenon to take hold? The Tanganyika laughter epidemic remains one of history's most peculiar and unsettling medical mysteries, a chilling reminder of the unknown complexities of the human mind and its profound, sometimes terrifying, connection to the body.